You are standing in a hall filled with light, music, and 1,000 watching eyes. Gold flickers along the walls. Incense hangs heavy in the air. The empire is celebrating, and you are supposed to be invisible, silent, ornamental, safe behind your father's power. Then it happens. The man meant to protect Hirua, father, the King of Kings, gives your body away with a single sentence spoken through wine. At first, you don't understand what you've heard. You only feel the room change. The musicians stop playing. Conversations collapse into silence. Even the torches seem to hesitate, their flames wavering as if unsure whether to continue burning. Across the banquet hall, an old general smiles. He is older than your grandfather. His hair is thin. His eyes are sharp. He knows what this moment means. He knows your father cannot take the words back. Not here. Not now. Not in front of the entire empire. Your hands begin to shake. Your mother raises her veil and covers her face. The women in the hall do not look surprised. They look afraid. Every one of them understands exactly what has just happened, because they have lived under this truth their entire lives. Your life is no longer yours. Your father does not look at you. He looks past you toward his image, his pride, the illusion of a good emperor that cannot afford to fracture in public. His voice does not tremble when he speaks again. He uses only one word. Granted. The guests applaud. The general bows, and you stand there swallowing a scream that will never be heard. Because in this palace, a daughter's suffering matters less than a king's reputation. This quiet moment, this single word spoken at a banquet is where her story truly ends. Her name was Achaemenid, and what happened to her is one of the most disturbing examples of how absolute power destroys even the people it claims to love, the world she was born into. To understand why this could happen, you must understand the world a maestress was born into. This was not just a kingdom. It was the Persian Empire at its height. Xerxes was not merely a king. He was the king of kings, ruler of a domain stretching from Libya to the Indus Valley, from Thrace to Ethiopia. Nearly 50 million people lived under his command. According to Herodotus, who later spoke with men who served inside Xerxes' own court, his word was not advice. It was law. A single breath from his lips could elevate a family or erase it from existence. But the greatest danger in this empire was not beyond the palace walls. It was inside them. The Persian court was not a home. It was a sealed system of obedience and silence. Eunuchs guarded its corridors, men, stripped of family, identity, and future, loyal only to the king. No rumors escaped. No dissent survived. Everyone inside understood a terrifying truth. The closer you stood to absolute power, the easier it was to be crushed by it. Even the king, as own blood, lived under rigid control. Every movement regulated, every interaction monitored. Privacy did not exist. Autonomy did not exist. And for the women of the royal household, especially the king's daughter's life, was both elevated and terrifying. They were adorned in public and erased in reality. Royal daughters were rarely named in official inscriptions. They were not remembered for achievements. They existed as political currency tools for alliance, rewards for loyalty, offerings wrapped in silk and jewels, treasures of the empire, with less freedom than servants. A maestress belonged to this world, the daughter who stayed too close. Amastras occupied a strange and dangerous position. She shared her name with Xerxes' principal wife, the elder queen Amastris, a woman remembered for her fierce nature. But the younger Amastris, the girl, was born to one of the king's secondary concubines, a woman of Bactrian origin. Even in a court where beauty was curated like an art, her appearance was noted as exceptional. She was raised within the women's quarters of the palace, educated by eunuchs and elder concubines. She learned what was expected of a royal daughter: music, dance, poetry, embroidery. She learned how to smile without speaking and how to obey without question. But something about her set her apart. Xerxes kept her close, while other daughters were sent away into strategic marriages across the empire. Amastras remained near her father. To one outsider, This might look like affection. Protection. Inside the Persian court, it was neither. A father's favor was not safety. It was exposure, because everything changed in the year 479 BCE, during a single banquet that would destroy her life, the oath that should never have been spoken. According to both Greek and Persian accounts, Xerxes had been drinking for days. He was surrounded by flattersmen who fed his sense of divinity, reminding him that he ruled the greatest empire the world had ever known. His recent failures in Greece still haunted him. His authority needed to feel absolute again, so he stood before thousands and swore an oath by the Persian gods. He would grant any requests made of him. It was a catastrophic promise. One man in the hall understood this immediately. Artabanes' son. Artabanes, an aging general once loyal to Xerxes' father, had lost 3 wives. He was ambitious, increasingly sidelined, and keenly aware of how power truly worked. He also knew something crucial. Xerxes could not break a public oath. Not now, not after humiliation, not in front of the empire. So Artabanes rose. He bowed, and he asked for the king's daughter. He asked for The silence that followed was suffocating. Guests stared between the general and the throne. Royal princesses were not given to ordinary subjects, certainly not to elderly generals. Everyone expected Xerxes to refuse. Everyone was wrong. Herodotus describes the king turning pale, gripping the arms of his throne, glancing around like a trapped animal. Minutes passed, long, unbearable minutes. Then, finally, he forced out the word that ended her life. Granted, the decision that could not be undone. Later, sources suggest Demosthenes pleaded with her father in private. She begged him to undo it, to find a loophole, to save her from the life she already feared. Xerxes hesitated, but in the end, he chose his image. To retract the promise would expose weakness. To deny Artabanes publicly would risk political instability. And so he told himself the lie that has justified cruelty throughout history. The good of the state outweighs the life of a child. 3 months later, the marriage was carried out with all the spectacle expected of Persian royalty. Silk, jewels, gold worth more than entire cities. And beneath it all, a 14-year-old girl walked through the ritual like a prisoner being escorted to a sentence she did not understand, but would never escape. The ceremony ended, but the consequences had only begun. A mistress had not entered a marriage. She had entered a sentence. The age difference alone was staggering. She was 14. Artabanes was well past 60. Even in a society where older men marrying young girls was accepted, this pairing unsettled the court. Whispers trailed through marble corridors and perfumed gardens. They spoke of Xerxes' cruelty, of a daughter sacrificed for pride. They whispered of the king's obsession with image, and the girl trapped beneath it. And yet, no one could intervene. Artabanes claimed her as his own. He did not see a wife. He saw a possession, a living bridge to the royal bloodline. From the first night, he imposed control over her every move. She was forbidden from visiting her family quarters. She could not speak to her sisters. She could not see her mother. In a culture where female kinship was essential for emotional survival, this severing was cruel beyond imagination. A mistress was effectively imprisoned in his private quarters, surrounded by servants whose loyalty was to him, not to her. The palace once, a place of music, laughter, and whispered secrets among women became a cell. Walls of gold and silk enclosed her, but they were walls nonetheless. Privacy, freedom, autonomy all vanished. She tried to reach her father. Fragments of correspondence hinted her desperate attempts to send secret letters pleading for help, but Xerxes, embarrassed and trapped by his own decision, never responded. His silence was a sword that cut deeper than any whip. Mistress understood quickly that the protection she had once imagined from her father did not exist. She was alone. The burden of expectation, Artabanus' obsession was not just ownership, it was inheritance. He needed an heir, a child with royal blood who could secure his position permanently in the empire. Amastris was no longer a girl. She was a vessel. Ancient sources suggest that the conjugal demands were relentless. The palace summoned fertility specialists. Herbs, potions, and treatments were administered. Every step of her body, every cycle of her womb, was measured and manipulated to produce the child he desired. The young girl's body belonged to politics, not to her. 3 years into the marriage, in 476 BCE, she became pregnant. Artabanus rejoiced. To him, the pregnancy was triumph incarnate. Grand sacrifices were made to the Persian gods. The empire was proud, the court intrigued, and the king distant, ashamed, silent watched from afar. But for Amastris, pregnancy was despair. It was not hope, it was a tightening noose. She knew that if the child survived, she would be bound to Artabanus for life. Mothers of royal children were untouchable, could not be divorced, dismissed, or released. Her body had produced a future, but at the cost of her freedom. The palace midwives recorded her labor as grueling. It stretched across 2 days, exhausting her fragile body. When her son arrived, Artabanus named him Xerxes, after the emperor himself. It was a deliberate assertion of power, a statement that the boy and, by extension, Amastris belonged to him. The infant was weak. Physicians doubted he would survive. Artabanus ignored every warning. He planned elaborate ceremonies to announce the child to the empire. But fate, or perhaps the cruelty of circumstance, intervened. 10 days later, the boy died. The aftermath of death. The death of the infant transformed Artabanus. He became more abusive, more controlling, more terrifying. Servants whispered of screams from behind closed doors. Witnesses spoke of bruises on Amastris' arms and face. On one occasion, she was beaten so severely that she remained bedridden for weeks. And when her body healed, her spirit did not. The girl who once resisted, who pleaded and fought for small freedoms, became a shadow. She ate only when forced. She spoke rarely. Hours passed in silence, her gaze fixed on nothing. She was hollowed out, emptied of the life she had once known. Xerxes was eventually informed. He began to recognize, belatedly, the consequences of his promise. He attempted discreet intervention, urging Artabanus to treat her with some measure of gentleness. But in Persian custom, the treatment of a wife was entirely the husband's prerogative. Any interference by the king risked political disruption and exposed his own weakness. Artabanus understood this. He knew that the king's daughter could no longer rely on protection. His control was absolute. The abuse continued, sanctioned by silence, by fear, by centuries of tradition. 14 years of silence. Years passed. Amastris' life became a rhythm of dread and endurance. The marriage, the isolation, the daily humiliation, the impossible expectations they shaped her. She grew older, but her childhood never returned. Every day reinforced the lesson whispered at her first banquet. Power protects only itself. Then, 14 years after her marriage, everything shifted. Xerxes was assassinated in a palace coup led by Artabanus and several co-conspirators. Politics, rival factions, grievances all played their roles. But according to some accounts, Artabanus used Amastris' suffering as justification. He painted the king as a tyrant who sacrificed his daughter to protect his pride. The cruelty inflicted became a political weapon. The coup succeeded briefly. Artabanus ruled behind the scenes for 7 months. Then Xerxes' son, Artaxerxes, rallied loyal forces, crushed the rebellion, and executed Artabanus in violent confrontation. One might imagine that Amastris finally tasted freedom after 14 years of torment. But the truth was far darker. The woman who survived her own life. By then, her body had aged prematurely. Hair streaked with gray face hollowed. Expression beckoned. She did not return to court life, despite Artaxerxes' efforts. He offered private quarters, servants, otani buche, refused banquets, festivals, ceremonies. The woman who had once danced with grace now lived in shadow. One day, musicians played a melody from her youth, a song she had danced to on that fateful night in 479 BCE. At first, she listened silently. Then, something broke inside her. A scream erupted, a sound so raw and shattering that it ruptured the instruments, and she collapsed in tears. The first she had shed in years. She would never recover. Contemporary sources are vague about her death, merely noting prolonged illness. Modern interpretation suggests something more devastating. Slow self-starvation, severe depression, and psychological collapse. Amastra's spirit had already died decades before her body followed. Her story, unsurprisingly, was erased. Royal inscriptions do not mention her. Xerxes is remembered for building palaces, waging war, challenging Greece, not for sacrificing his daughter in the name of pride. Only in Greek accounts Herodotus and later chroniclers do fragments of her tragedy survive. Even there, she appears as a footnote. An illustration of Persian excess, a cautionary tale about the dangers of absolute power. Amistras lived for decades in a palace full of light, yet trapped in perpetual darkness. Physically free after Artabanus' death, the freedom offered by Artaxerxes could not touch the hollow inside her. Corridors once graceful now echoed with silence. Laughter and music became distant memories, reminders of a life stolen. She existed as a ghost in her own home, alive but unmoving, her body sustaining her, her spirit abandoned. Servants provided comfort, fresh clothes, soft bedding, food, and attendance for her every need. Yet she rarely ate, spoke, or left her rooms. Compassionate gestures met with blank stares or silence. Trauma fused with her identity. Childhood, marriage, motherhood stolen, replaced by survival's unrelenting pressure. A princess, daughter of kings, yet she had no sovereignty over her body, will, or life. No event haunted her more than the drunken banquet where her fate was first sealed. That night, her father's granted replayed endlessly. 14 years of suffering began with a single word. The echo of that one syllable lingered in her dreams, a reminder that even those who claim to protect can destroy. Every subsequent hardship, forced marriage, abusive husband, the death of her child traced back to that moment. Amastrus internalized the truth. Power protected itself, not the people who lived under it. When those people were family, daughters, wives, or children of kings, the betrayal cut even deeper. Amastrus' life became a series of coping mechanisms, each more desperate than the last. She withdrew from human interaction, refusing to see her sisters or mother. She would sometimes stare for hours out the windows of her private chambers, watching the gardens. Musicians were occasionally sent to lift her spirits, but even familiar melodies triggered unbearable grief. On one occasion, they played the song she had danced to on the night of her public humiliation. The sound broke something inside her. She screamed a sound so raw, so uncontained. For the first time in years, she cried. Yet it was not healing it. It was a recognition of grief. Historians interpret her prolonged silence, withdrawal, and refusal to eat as psychological self-preservation. She claimed her only remaining domain, the right to decide when she would sustain herself. By 36, she had spent over 2 decades living in the shadow of her father's pride, her husband's cruelty. Contemporary sources note only that she died after prolonged illness. Modern interpretation suggests the illness was a physical manifestation of decades of untreated psychological trauma. Her body survived long after her spirit had been extinguished. In life, she had been a vessel, a symbol. In death, she remained largely invisible. Royal inscriptions never mention her. The empire remembered Xerxes as a builder and a conqueror, not as a father who sacrificed his daughter. Only Greek sources preserve fragments of her story, often anonymized, treating her not as a person. Amastra's story is more than historical tragedy. It is a universal warning about absolute power. Her suffering did not result from enemies or foreign armies. It resulted from those who claimed to love her. Her father, the King of Kings, did not physically harm her, yet through pride, indifference, he destroyed her life. Her husband, a man who should have protected her, became her jailer. Her child died, a casualty of the same system. The tragedy of Amastrus illustrates the subtle, often invisible, forms of violence that absolute power can create. Psychological torment, Emotional isolation and the denial of autonomy can devastate a life as surely as physical abuse. In S story, we see the cost of unchecked authority, of decisions made to preserve image rather than humanity. Even today, Amestris exists only in fragments. Persian records ignore her. Her life is preserved in whispers, oral traditions, and Greek historians like Herodotus. From these fragments, we reconstruct her existence. A girl who is a daughter, a princess, a mother, and a wife. Yet none of these roles granted her freedom or protection. The court that once celebrated her beauty became the arena of her suffering. Each ceremony, each jewel, a gilded cage. Her story reminds us that historical narratives often glorify rulers while erasing the human cost of their power. Amestris' tragedy is not unique. Countless individuals have suffered quietly under the weight of authority. In the end, Amestris died in a palace filled with light and luxury, yet haunted by shadows no one could see. She did not die as a result of a sword or an enemy's attack. She died slowly, the victim of neglect. Her spirit had already left the world decades earlier, leaving behind a body that continued to move through rituals. Her life and her death force us to confront a chilling truth. The greatest horrors are often invisible, carried out by those closest to us, those we trust, and those who claim to love us. Amestris' tragedy is a mirror for all societies. A warning about the dangers of unchecked authority and the fragility of human dignity when it is subordinated to pride and power.